I have been asked to speak on the topic Safeguarding Nigeria's Future, Prioritizing Citizens' Welfare and Security Amidst Challenges. So I've done my best to prepare a written lecture which I believe will be circulated and which I will try, because of lack of time, to rush through. But let me say that what I have done in this presentation is to begin with a brief introduction, where I set out the main points and the arguments and observations regarding the topic on which I have been asked to speak. Then I have a section titled Conceptual Clarifications. And I have identified a number of concepts relating to the theme of today's discussion, which I tried to clarify. I may not have the time to do that in the presentation because of lack of time, but so that anybody who is interested in knowing more about how do scholars and practitioners conceptualize citizen and citizenship, or security, or state and the role of the state, particularly in welfare provisioning, those would be clearer. Then I have a section that I call Contextual Analysis of Challenges in Nigeria. And in this section, I pay attention in particular to two aspects of structural challenges, which, if they are not addressed appropriately, are likely to affect the future of our country, put it in jeopardy, and therefore they are very, very important issues to address if we want to safeguard the future of our country. I also speak about not just structural challenges, but even systemic challenges. And then I talked about what I call value orientation, because value orientation is a critical aspect of citizens' engagement and government's engagement in terms of bringing positive changes and development in society. Then I have a section where I highlight specifically in the Nigerian context citizens' welfare and security challenges. Then I have a section which I call Towards Safeguarding Citizens' Welfare and Security, and then I made quite a number of recommendations addressing those challenges which I feel have to be addressed if we want to safeguard the future of our country. So basically that is the structure of my presentation, and I would like to begin with the introduction. I begin by observing that Nigeria is a country with enormous potentials, and we are often told that Nigeria is the largest economy in Africa, with stupendous natural resources and agricultural resources, in addition to having a comparatively much more trained and intellectually endowed human capital. We are also often reminded that 1 out of every 4 Africans is a Nigerian, and indeed 1 out of every 5 black people in the world is a Nigerian. In spite of all these matters of pride, because there are things to be proud of, it is a fact that Nigeria currently faces tremendous wide-ranging challenges, which, if not urgently and successfully addressed, would put the future of our country as well as the future of our citizens in jeopardy. Anywhere in the continent of the world in which a country of 200 million people is allowed to be in jeopardy, the consequences will be wide-ranging and calamitous for the entire continent. Therefore, safeguarding Nigeria's future, and by extension that of Africa, requires addressing these challenges and reprioritizing the Nigerian state's policies and strategies towards addressing the fundamental needs and aspirations of citizens. And of course, one of the fundamental needs and aspirations of citizens relates to welfare provisioning and security provisioning. The profound challenges which currently afflict Nigeria can be said to be structural, systemic, and related to value orientation. Structurally, we need to, among other things, address the challenges of how our federation is arranged, how it has evolved, how it has become distorted and centralized, and how to deconcentrate power and resources from the federal center to the state and local government levels. We also need to address how our national economy is structured and integrated into the global political economy with greater benefits to former colonial masters than to Nigeria and its citizens. These systemic challenges are related to our system of government, its composition, or what some scholars are beginning to call decomposition of that system of government, the costs of governance, institutional inefficiency and decay, some even talk about institutional decomposition, as well as bad governance, which of course means that the state is unable to provide not just security, but address the fundamental needs and aspirations of the citizens. With regards to value orientation, we need to address and reverse the mindsets of both our elite, especially the so-called political class, and even the mindset of our masses, especially the electorate, from what I call destructive engagement to a more constructive involvement with the electoral process, so as to ensure electoral integrity in bringing about respectable, responsible, and responsive representatives of the people into the executive and the legislative arms of government. Responsible people who would address the needs and aspirations of citizens who elected them through good governance, rather than those who will merely focus upon their personal selfish interest, which is what most of them do regrettably presently. It is not to say that there are no good people, but those good people are in short supply in our governance process. And where you combine that with the reckless mindset that many of them have, and then the distorted nature of our federal arrangement, then obviously a combination of these has serious negative consequences in terms of our national development, as well as in terms of how best we can safeguard the future of our country. So the combined effects of these challenges has resulted in contested legitimacy of the state, because many citizens don't feel that government is for them, and therefore that is why we have all these sorts of incidences of irredentism and challenging the power and authority of the state in many parts of this country. They also result in bad governance, in stunted economic growth and development, in increasing inequality and poverty among citizens, and indeed in the failure of the state to provide for the welfare and security of its citizens. In fact, because of this failure in terms of security, in terms of welfare, many scholars are also now referring to Nigeria as a failed state. Because there are three critical roles of a state. And in the Nigerian context, at least two of those are more or less abandoned. And I'm talking in terms of the aggregation. There may be islands, okay, of competence and of deliverability in terms of the function and role of government. But if you take it as a whole, those are just islands. The generality of the process of governance does not help to secure the citizens, does not address their fundamental needs and aspirations. In fact, it only results in a reckless tendency by some of the more destructive elites in order to divide and rule and to mobilize, whether it is ethnicity or religion or regionalism, in order to further undermine state and the positive role that it could play. Nigerian citizens have for long aspired for representative democracy, for socio-economic development, and they've also struggled for it. Their aspirations and the struggles have, however, been constantly frustrated by the ruling and the governing classes to the extent that many citizens are now despondent, and in fact, many of them think that the struggle to improve our governance process is futile, and therefore many people are beginning to even withdraw from the political arenas. Rather, they have these governing classes have manipulated primordial identities to subvert the essence and content of citizenship, and have, for example, significantly elevated so-called individual rights and primordial sentiments over and above citizenship rights, of course with dire negative consequences on national cohesion, stability, and socio-economic development in our country. The struggle to acquire and protect and defend citizenship rights, as I observed in another lecture in 2021, is linked to the general struggles for expansion of democratic states, for protection and defense of fundamental rights, and for the right to live in peace and securely, and to earn a living in the context of good democratic governance. Unfortunately, this is becoming elusive in our country presently. So the discussions about citizens' welfare and security in contemporary Nigeria needs to center on how the state, currently under the liberal democratic framework, can discharge its responsibilities and obligations to its citizens through coherent, focused, people-oriented, redistributive policies which are targeted towards addressing their fundamental needs and aspirations. So basically, this is the main argument I have made in this paper. What follows is just further elaboration and expatiation. I will just quickly go over the issue of citizenship, because citizenship is very, very important. And there are two dimensions to citizenship. There is a narrow and a broader dimension of it. Historically, citizenship is associated with the residents of a city or someone who enjoys privileges of living in a city. And if you go back to the Greek city-states, that is the notion of citizenship. But citizenship is also qualified even in those ancient times. For example, in the Greek city-states, to be a citizen, you must own property, and the women are not considered as citizens. But in the modern context, any person that is born in a country and his parents are also in that country, or anybody who has actually been given citizenship using other criteria, is now entitled to all the rights and privileges that any member of that country should have. But the challenge of governance is associated with the extent to which it can guarantee these rights that individuals have as citizens. And if the state fails to guarantee these rights, then obviously the state is failing in one of its most fundamental roles in terms of national development and progress. And so the point I have made in this section, relying on definitions and conceptual clarifications by scholars, is to say that citizenship is something that is very important in the context of a modern nation state, and that in the Nigerian context, we seem to have ignored, even though the Constitution may have defined who is a citizen, what are the rights of a citizen, but in reality, in governance, these issues are not given the attention that they deserve. So there is exclusion, there is marginalization. Maybe some of these politically are hyped, but there is an essence and basis of this in reality, which then tend to increase the perception of this. So those aspects of the reality, we must be able to address them. And nobody else can address them except through the governance process. Citizens have roles and responsibilities and obligations. But if a priori the state does not guarantee rights of citizens, then the citizens will not feel obligated to contribute not only to national development, but to also protecting and defending those rights. So with regards to security, again, there are two dimensions about security, and unfortunately, when we speak about security, most often we tend to rely on the narrower definition of security. And the narrower definition of security is associated with physical security, either a security of a person with regards to his himself or herself, or with regards to his or her property. So security is conceived as government's ability to protect people from being harmed, or to protect their lives and their properties from being destroyed or in any way damaged. But it's a very, very narrow notion of what security is. Because globally now, it is recognized that there is a broader definition of security, which is actually the role and responsibility of the state, and therefore which needs to be given attention, because it is all encapsulating and it even accommodates the issue of physical and personal security. And that is what is now called, and virtually United Nations through UNDP and other agencies are emphasizing on that, and it is simply called human security. Human security is very, very important, and it is the responsibility of a government in any country, any modern nation state, to ensure that it protects not just the lives and the properties of citizens, but also address their fundamental needs and aspirations. And unfortunately, in the Nigerian context, right from colonial days up to present, the emphasis is on, when they say role of the state in security, is focused on physical security. So as important as it is, the welfare needs of the people is part of human security. And if you do not address it, then addressing just the physical security leaves quite a lot of gap. Now, unfortunately, in the Nigerian context, unfortunately, even the physical security now is becoming a major issue. It's not even protected. There are many areas that now people really suffer tremendously, either from the attacks and the injuries and the killings of people, or in terms of the threat that attack is imminent. So it's very, very important that when we consider the issue of security in Nigeria, we have to take into consideration that even the minimal requirements in terms of a narrow definition of security is not being addressed, not to talk of the broader issue of security, which consists human security in terms of fundamental needs. So actually, when people speak of human security, there are several components. We talk about economic security in terms of addressing persistence of poverty or unemployment. We talk about food security in terms of hunger and famine, and we talk about even health security in terms of protection from deadly infectious diseases or malnutrition in the case of children, or even access to healthcare, basic healthcare services. There is environmental security. Now people are talking about climate change. It's very, very important also. And community security, political security, and other things. There's no time to go into all this. But the key point here is that we need to recognize that there is a narrower and a broader definition of what security is. In Nigeria, we have paid a legacy of colonial rule, emphasis on personal security, and which we are not even competently addressing, not to talk of the issue of human security. Briefly on the role of the state. Nigeria is a modern nation state, operates under the framework of what is called liberal democracy or representative democracy. That is the trajectory in which, again, our country was put on by colonial rule, and which even after independence and series of democratic transitions, we have retained. Okay? So under this framework, the liberal democratic framework, the state has three major roles. One, protection and defense of the territorial integrity of the state, as well as the human security of the citizens within that territory. That is one. The second one is that the state has a role and responsibility in maintaining law and order, in ensuring that there are mechanisms of dispute resolution so that the strong does not overwhelm the weak. And that is why you have the police to maintain law and order, other security agencies, and even the judiciary as a major institution for adjudication of disputes and settlement of disputes, or even punishment of crimes that are committed within the territory. And of course, the third and most important function of the state in a modern nation state under this liberal democratic framework is actually providing for the basic needs of citizens and ensuring the satisfaction of their needs and aspirations towards the broader definition of human security. So on the one hand, one of the fundamental purposes of the state, therefore, in this context, is for the protection of all citizens with regards to the issues that I have mentioned. The role of the state with regards to citizens' welfare is to actively support and provide an enabling environment for equal citizenship for all, and furthermore, it is for the role of the state to provide and deliver public goods to the citizens living within these designated parameters. The inability of the state to ensure the security for citizens, of course, breeds insecurity, brings chaos and conflicts associated with bad governance. And in the Nigerian context, of course, there are many illustrations of this. So I now move to a discussion of how we should understand the context, both structural, systemic, and value orientation challenges in Nigeria. And again here, I want to be very brief. When you get the paper, you can see the details. I have mentioned that there are two structural challenges which, if we do not address them, can affect the way and manner by which we can safeguard the future of this country, or to be brutally frank, can put our country in jeopardy. And I will take them each one by one in the Nigerian context and illustrate them. The first one I said is the nature of the Nigerian Federation and the structure of the Nigerian Federation, how it has evolved. I need to remind us, those who are students of history, that after the amalgamation of their colonial territories, in particular the colony of Lagos, Protectorate of Southern Nigeria, and the Protectorate of Northern Nigeria, in an entity named Nigeria in 1914, the British attempted to administer this huge territory as a decentralized unitary system. And they did this until around 1951, when the reality of the diversity and complexity of this territory compelled them to introduce what they called a quasi-federal arrangement under the Macpherson's Constitution in 1951. Again, soon it proved that this is inadequate, and 3 years later, in 1954, they introduced the Littleton's Constitution, which then converted Nigeria into a federal system with 3 regions, the eastern, the western, and the northern regions, and then with a federal government. And these, under a federal arrangement, are supposed to have what are called coordinate responsibilities. The states have clearly defined roles, the regions have clearly defined roles, and the federal government itself has clearly defined roles. And there is an inherent balance in terms of ensuring that there are no conflicts, and in terms of ensuring that the balance creates a stability that can help the progress and development of the country. However, the period of military rule actually upset this balance, created a serious imbalance, and indeed resulted in a situation in which clearly the federal government assumed powers that make it superior to the regions which have also been converted into states under military rule. So it is real that the federal system, is skewed and it needs to be addressed. Obviously, the military rulers had reasons as to why they had to do this. First of all, there was a crisis and the civil war from 1967 to 1970, which resulted in the creation of the initial 12 states to replace the 4 regions in the country. But beyond that, the military in power is a very hierarchical organization. So even if they did not create additional states, and even if they had retained the 4 regions, there would still have been a very skewed federal system because of that hierarchy in the military. And for example, when the military take over power, whoever presides at the federal level, is a general. And the people they post at the state original levels are what? Are colonels at most, not even brigadier generals. So you can't say the states and the regions have coordinate responsibility when one tier at the federal level has a general, and at the state and regional levels you have colonels. So obviously there is no way that a colonel can afford the authority and constitutional powers of a state or region when a general sits at the federal level. So that the nature of the hierarchy of authority also contributed significantly to the destabilization of the skewing of a federal arrangement that we started. If you recall, in the 60s, people were saying that that's a period when we had true federalism in force. I don't agree with that. I don't think there is anything conceptually that can be called true federalism. Every federal system is a product of history and experience in a context. So it's very important. So we shouldn't romanticize what happened in the 60s, but we must recognize that military rule has distorted the nature and the operations of our federal system, and we need to address it because it has created serious obstacles in terms of how we can progress. So if you look at the 1999 Constitution, everybody can see that the so-called powers given to the federal government under the exclusive list are mostly powers taken away from the states under military rule. You know, and not only did they take these powers from the residual, from the concurrent list, because in a federal system, particularly ours, you have the exclusive for the federal, you have the concurrent, where both the states and the federal can have dual responsibilities, and then you have what is called residual powers. Anything that is not defined belongs to the state. You know, so and in some constitutions they try to define that. So, frankly, all this talk about some states not being viable because they lack revenues or revenue base, and all these things about how the federal government is doing everything from primary healthcare to primary education to all sorts of things that in any serious federal system the federal government has no business in. We see it in the Nigerian context presently. So my argument is that we need to have an enlightened self-interest. Yes, in the context of our politics, there is a lot of brinkmanship, there is a lot of showmanship, you know, and therefore there is a lot of mobilization with regards to this issue of restructuring of the federation. But we need to recognize and we need to begin to prepare on the need for having an evidence-based, rational, you know, and sensible restructuring of the Nigerian Federation, because everybody will stand to benefit from that. So it's very, very important that we pay attention to that. The other issue, of course, I mentioned relates to the structure of the Nigerian economy. That's the other structural challenge. Our economy has been put on a trajectory which creates more benefits to foreign powers than to us. Initially, of course, to the British, but now increasingly to the major partners and participants in the global economy. And unfortunately, in spite of civil rule and military rule, we have been unable to actually address this disequilibrium. And therefore, it's very, very important that we recognize that between now and 2027, before it is too late, certain major decisions need to be taken in order to create relative independence for our economic growth, in order to ensure that we move away from this dependence on revenues generated for crude oil, that we emphasize production in other sectors, particularly in the agricultural as well as in the manufacturing sectors. It's terrible when you look at the statistics, you know, in terms of even the manufacturing sector now has been terribly crippled, largely by the way and manner in which the federal government seems to have taken hook, line and sinker many of the recommendations of the IMF and the World Bank, would just keep pushing us deeper and deeper into situations of dependency and lack of self-independence and a self-sustaining process of development. So this is very, very important, because if we do not deal with this structural issue, and if we allow policies and programs pushed down our throats by IMF and the World Bank, in the next 5 years, it will be very, very difficult to get out of their stranglehold, and it can then create a challenge which can put our country in jeopardy. So now I'm skipping, I know I'm running out of time. And then I talked about systemic challenges. Very quickly, there are two aspects of the systemic challenges which I think we have to address. The first one is about the political system. Initially, it was parliamentary, but compared to other parliamentary systems at that time, up to the 1970s, our parliamentary system lacked what were called consociational accommodative attributes compared to other parliamentary systems. And that's why the military, particularly the Murtala regime, which was nationalistic, said, look, the parliamentary system is too divisive for our country. Let's move in the direction of a presidential system. We took a presidential system. Regrettably, the presidential system now, the separation of power, which was attractive at that time, has now been destroyed. And you now have these executive people who exercise power recklessly and who actually increasingly take away power and destroy institutions. In addition to that, they have also raised the cost of governance in such a way that even that runaway cost of governance is a serious challenge and can put Nigeria in jeopardy. Because even America that operates the presidential system has controls and mechanisms that ensure sanity in terms of expenditure controls, even some penalties that detract from a tendency to be profligate in terms of expenditure of governance. So we really need to address this issue. Some may require constitutional amendments, but there are things, if we have good presidents or good governance, there are policy decisions that they can take in order to cut the cost of governance. So I am saying this because it appears that there is now a movement of some elite that is pushing for a return to a parliamentary system. I think to my mind, it's a terrible thing to happen, it's flip-flopping. You move from parliamentary, you go to presidential, you are not doing it well, but you think the solution is to go back to parliamentary. In fact, the culture that has now been introduced of profligacy in government, even if you go back to parliamentary system, is going to remain the same thing. So you will not solve the problem. The problem is we have a presidential system and it is a convoluted presidential system. It is not taking the best practices from the other presidential systems in the world, and we need to reform it. And it's very, very important that we pay attention to reforming. Quickly on value orientation. You see, values are one of the most important guiding principles and frameworks for governance and for development in any modern nation state. As societies evolve, they evolve with clear values which guide attitudes, which guide conduct, and which in particular guide the process of selecting and recruiting leaders in a country. And in Nigeria, all the pre-colonial societies have certain values, because some of these values are truly universal. So when we came in as Nigeria, these values were still there. And that is why now when we talk about leaders, whether in the West or in the East or even predominantly here in the North, we could see leaders who performed, who are selfless, who are integrity, who are what is the word? Who are God-fearing, and who do not promote their personal and selfish interests over and above public interests. And that's why up to tomorrow, everybody speaks about the Santana of Sokoto, Tafa of Kenya. In the West, up to tomorrow, they talk about Awolowo and the others. These are people who have imbibed those values and who have used them as guiding principles for the work that they do. Unfortunately for us, there seems to be a decline and a retrogression in terms of how those positive values guide us, not just as individuals and citizens in Nigeria, but especially how those values guide those recruited or selected or elected into leadership positions. I have 3 minutes, so you will get the paper and you will read the arguments. But I have a section in the paper where I have clearly delineated with statistics to show how lack of these values and orientation, how bad governance, and how lack of good leadership actually is pushing Nigeria towards becoming a failed state. As I have said, I don't believe Nigeria is a failed state, but I think, and we need to realize that Nigeria is a failing state. Nigeria is a failing state. And if we don't take care and we put it in jeopardy, we can't safeguard it, then the worst can happen, God forbid. So it's very, very important that we take this. So the next section actually provides tables where you can see how Nigeria is ranked on all global indices. Whether it is how you can compare Nigeria with other countries in terms of security provisioning, how you can compare Nigeria and other countries in terms of the rate of corruption, how you can compare Nigeria and other countries in terms of all other critical indices that the United Nations group to create what they call the Human Development Index. On all of these indices, I regret to say Nigeria is ranking very lowly. The tables are there, you can see them. The only place where Nigeria is ranking highly, there is an index on crime in Africa. Nigeria is number 1. So these are things we can laugh about, but frankly, they are very serious issues that we really have to pay attention to. So I will use my 3 minutes quickly to so looking at all of these challenges, I have made recommendations about what needs to be done. I think the most important thing is we need to begin to think. Those of us in the academia whose business description includes research, includes analysis, we have a major responsibility in this. But our leaders, those in leadership position, need to actually try to understand these challenges and find ways and the means of engaging constructively in order to address this. So with regards to the structure of the Nigerian Federation, I think that a lot needs to be done before 2027 in the current period. Otherwise, we will miss a major opportunity and it may become too late to do anything that can rescue our country from those challenges. So my argument is that between now and 2027, we need to pull our heads together, have a reasoned, rational, evidence-based process of restructuring the Nigerian Federation. And to my mind, the major thing we need to do is actually to deconcentrate power and the resources from the federal tier and spread them to the state and local governments. Even if all we do is to go back to the way in which power was distributed in the 1963 Constitution, we should do that. But I even think we should go beyond that, because we need to reduce the power of the federal government, because in fact that power of the federal government, in which whoever is elected president controls virtually all the resources, creates the reality, but more importantly the perception that those are used against one group vis-a-vis the other. Of course, there is a fear that if more power and resources go to the state governments and local governments, given what we see happening in Nigeria now, many people are afraid that it cannot solve the problem. But my own thinking is that the more power and the resources in the states and local government, the less attractive the federal government becomes, then the more people will concentrate in terms of bringing appropriate reforms. So it's very, very important that we truly address this. There are many recommendations under that. I will move to the Nigerian economy. I think, again, we need to find ways and the means of reducing our dependence on revenues from oil, improving agricultural productivity and agro-allied industries, and employment opportunities for the teeming, useful population that has no jobs, and also ensuring that we revive the manufacturing sector. No country develops if it cannot produce sufficiently for the home market. A situation in which we see in Nigeria, where virtually everything is imported, really is a recipe for disaster and can push our country into a situation in which we cannot safeguard its future. Conclusion. Theoretically, as I said earlier on, the state exists, among other things, in order to cater for the security, welfare, and basic needs of citizens. In fact, no nation can exist for very long without institutional arrangements to promote the human security and the well-being of its members. Any state that fails to do this in the modern context would be considered as a failed state. Due to the resources ordinarily available to the state under normal circumstances, it should have the capacity and competence to address human security challenges and to actually decisively succeed in doing so. In this context, the Nigerian state needs to discharge this obligation to its citizens because currently it is not discharging it. However, the citizens also need to recognize they have obligations of citizenship to their country and therefore have a significant role to play in shaping the present and safeguarding the future of Nigeria. And I say this because the tendency we are seeing now, when people are just withdrawing and doing sit-down look, it doesn't help. If the reckless people are capturing the political process, the electoral process, capturing government and doing their best, if you just sit and watch, obviously they will destroy the future for everybody. So constructive engagement is absolutely necessary. People have to get involved, and so citizens have an obligation. In good or in bad times, citizens have a key role to play in order to ensure that their country survives and good things happen that are beneficial to the ordinary citizens. Ultimately, the best way to safeguard Nigeria's future and secure the welfare of citizens devoid of massive security challenges is to have elections with integrity. Through an electoral process that is not captured, and unfortunately now we are seeing like the process is being captured by reckless politicians, so that will bring good quality choices. An electoral process that is not captured will bring good quality choices of the people as they are elected public officials or representatives who have the positive value orientations in the governance processes and the institutions, and who would selflessly harness societal resources and deliver good quality services. Only in this way can the state have the requisite legitimacy, stability, competence and capacity, as well as resourcefulness to effectively address the needs of the people and to safeguard the future of our country. Thank you very much.